Welcome to Scene Change, a podcast by the National Federation of the Blind Performing Arts Division. All about equality, opportunity, accessibility, and the arts. Here, you'll learn adaptive techniques from performers in the know. We are changing what it means to be blind, one stage at a time. Thank you for joining us today. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Scene Change. I'm Lizzie Muhammad Park, the Vice President of the National Federation of the Blind Performing Arts Division, and your host of the show. Today's episode is all about how we can do comedy. We have two blind panelists joining us today, Shannon Canton and David Glasspool. Shannon is originally from Hawaii, but recently moved to Philly, where he's been doing comedy for the last year. He's the vice president of the Keystone Chapter in Philadelphia. David is a lifelong federationist, originally from Louisiana, who moved to Colorado and started doing comedy 7 years ago. So, getting into question one. Shannon, who or what made you decide to get into comedy?
So, I had a breakup a couple of years ago that probably was the real thing that pushed me into comedy. I figured that nothing's going to go lower than this. So I'm like, if I get booed off stage, I'm cool with that. But in terms of actually comedic inspirations, I love Patrice O'Neal. He was always someone who I really admired. I don't agree with half of the things he said, but he was still able to make me laugh. That is what I think comedy is all about. Making and pushing people and challenging them to think differently than you do while still making them laugh.
I love that. And I love your willingness to take a risk, saying that you didn't care pretty much if you got booed off stage. How about for you, David? Who or what was your inspiration for getting into comedy?
Well, I got an undergrad in theater at Louisiana Tech a long time ago, and I stunk at acting really bad, but some of my professors and friends said, hey, you should try stand-up or voiceover work, because I was good at doing impressions and different character voices, instead of just telling me, hey, you suck at acting, maybe get a better degree that you can actually use. But a few years later, when I moved to Colorado, I found some radio stations that had recently, I guess, come to town or something like that, whatever, but like that were just 24/7 stand-up comedy. And I had never really listened to stand-up that much. A little bit in college. I liked Robin Williams, mostly for his acting stuff. I liked Gabriel Iglesias. I liked him. He did a lot of voices, but I mostly didn't pay attention to stand-up. But when I was in Denver and I started listening to those radio stations, I kind of remembered how years before people had said, hey, you should try it. And I was living in a bigger city. And so I just kind of Googled open mics and started going to them a lot. And then I started diving into, into stand-up comedians and learning more about them. So I didn't at first really have any influences, but once I started going to open mics, I started listening to comedians. Maria Bamford is a comedian that was a very big influence on me when I first started. She was one of the first ones that whenever I was kind of like researching and like learning about comics, she is one who really stood out to me. So I probably for brevity, if someone said who's the biggest influence, I'd have to say her.
Wow.
Because, I could just kind of like when people say, what's your favorite? I'm like, 15 come to mind. So that's my one that I name. But
wow. Yeah. It's so cool. So you guys have these very different paths, but they're both fascinating. Okay. So I have to ask, because I have a bad feeling that I will get yelled at by my listeners if I don't. Can you do an impression for us?
There was one voice that I used to do in some of my jokes, but I don't do it anymore because it's jarring to the point where it kind of takes the audience out of the joke. And that's whenever I speak like this, like, hello, Lizzie, how are you? And that really so I was just doing a female character saying, oh my God, stop it. But it's so jarring that it would end up like after the set, somebody's like, that voice is crazy, but they couldn't know what the joke was about. So I kind of, but like I said, when I first started, a lot of the comedians I started listening to were comedians like Maria Bamford or Gabriel Iglesias, people who did voices. So I kind of relied on them a lot when I started. And then as I kept going, they were kind of seasoning on top of the actual material that I was writing. So I still do, characters and stuff, but not so much that one because.
Well, if the mood strikes you to jump into a character voice at any point, do feel free to answer in some other character because that's hilarious. And Shannon, I love hearing.
No impressions by me. No.
I'm not gonna ask you. I was gonna put you on the spot.
I do whenever I do impressions, I do like a terrible impression of whoever I'm trying to impersonate, but like an incredible impersonation of somebody else. Like my Donald Trump is a terrible Donald Trump, but an incredible Zoolander. It's awesome. Sorry, go on.
You can also feel free if the mood hits you to do an impersonation, even if it's not a great one. We still want to hear it. It doesn't matter. Shannon, what brought you to Philly? What are you doing in my city?
Comedy. That's it. Just knowing that. Yeah, this was just needed. I needed to get out of Hawaii. I love Hawaii so much, but it was just too. It was too easy. I mean, and not even in like a mean way. It's just everyone gets time. You make anybody laugh. I had a headline set within my first year. That should never happen anywhere. Never happen anywhere. It's not. It's so bad. Like right now, I'm happy every time I get a 10, 15-minute spot. And it's like, thank you, Lord. Over there, it was like, hey, what are you doing next week? Want to do 15, want to do 20. It doesn't make you better. You get into this false sense of, I'm good. And I knew I wasn't that good. It was Orlando, Florida. It was actually during an NFB convention. I was killing it. It was my 6th month. I was amazing. I was the world's greatest comedian at 6 months. And I invited everyone. I'm like, yo, you guys got to see me. I'm going to go. I'm going to kill. I've been crushing. And I was the number 22 in a mic with 23 people. It was everything you thought. And I went up there with all the confidence in the world. I'm like, hey, guys, remember that comedian from 4 comedians ago? Why isn't no one
Did you make the dumb mistake of telling the host, of letting the host know that the people who were with you were your friends?
No,
I
didn't.
They put you up late intentionally? Okay, because I imagine the host saw that, like, that's the guy who brought the people with him, so he's going up last.
Oh, I didn't. No,
people don't leave.
We couldn't find the spot, so I actually came in a little late. But they knew I was coming, so they gave me that second to the last spot, and I still had confidence. Everyone bombed that night. There was like one person who did okay, and I just went up, and I went up with all the confidence of an open micer who doesn't know what's about to happen. And I went, and it was such a bad bomb. I just remember it was the saddest advice. I walked off stage just distraught, down, just sweating. This dude came up to me. He's like, hey, my man, it's all right, young man. At least you were in the top 25. And there are only 23 comedians. And it was like, ooh, yeah. Back to the drawing board. Don't ever invite
those
anybody
kind of
to
open
mic. Yeah.
Those kind of open mics, those really crappy ones where just everyone does terrible, like, those can either be really depressing or really fun. Like, because if it's even maybe it'll be like maybe 1 or 2 audience members and then nothing but the other comedians. Because you can just do whatever. You can just go off script like it doesn't matter. It's just an open mic, a dumb open mic, and you can sometimes have, like, I've had some of the most fun times during mics like that, or they can be insanely depressing.
Oh yeah. No, that was the thing that made me push me into therapy. I'm like, okay, it was. I needed this. I needed that push because I didn't know anyone there. So my thing was, I'm gonna crush in Orlando, and they're gonna ask me to headline at the Orlando Improv. All these open mic dreams, and you don't. And I made every mistake a rookie would. A rookie who's been doing good for 2 months straight at open mics. I invited my friends to don't ever do that. If you guys do comedy and you're listening, don't do it. Don't invite your friends to an open mic.
invite them to a show, because if you invite them to open mics, when you actually get like a paid gig or a good show, they're probably not going to come because they've seen your material before, and you don't play the guitar and you're not in a band, so they're not going to come see you a second time.
And you can't cover jokes.
That's why I'm in a band.
Yeah, if you're in a band, they can just like, yeah, but if it's a comedian, it's just like, oh, we heard your jokes once. They were funny. They were really good. Good job. What are you going to do now? We're going to go watch that a hot, sexy person who plays the guitar. That's what we're going to do. Oh.
That's
Shannon, you just made me think. Can you imagine? I think Gabriel Iglesias' next comedy special should just be him chatting to his therapist. I think that would be the best comedy special. Like all these big name comedians. I want to see Jim Jeffries talk to his therapist. That would be fantastic.
Oh, it's
Netflix
so
for days on that, man.
We will turn it into a bit, but usually we're like, so we go to therapy. We're just like, yeah, they didn't laugh at our jokes. Well, is that really what you need for gratification? Doesn't it come from within? Yeah. And by the end of it, you're agreeing with them, and you're like, okay, let me go back to trying to get gratified by bombing on stage. That's what we need. That's where I get my chuckles and yucks from.
Your yucks?
And everyone bombs. Like if somebody tells you they've never bombed, then they don't have self-awareness. And they have bombed a bunch. So everyone does. And a lot of times that's what open mics are for, just for learning. And making dumb mistakes at open mics are better than making them at like an actual gig, like at a comedy club or something like that, where, where you make those mistakes in front of people who, book shows. It's just an open mic thing. That's kind of what they're for.
Yeah, it's been definitely that learning experience. You will get there, because everyone who gets on a hot streak will think this is just how comedy is. You're not as good as your best set, and you're not as bad as your worst set.
Yeah.
Well, that's good advice. I like that. So for each of you, what is your most memorable performance? Could be like over Zoom, like whatever was probably like your most memorable, and then also like why does it stand out to you?
I believe it was 2015, Fort Collins, Colorado. The day before, I had found out that a girl that I had kind of been seeing a little off and on, that I was maybe under the impression that we were in a relationship, and in fact we really weren't. And that I discovered that she had seen other people, and I was just an episode of The Wonder Years, just in love with this woman. I was head over heels. It was bad. It took me like a year and a half to get over her. It's the worst I've fallen for someone in I don't know how long. So I was definitely I cried. I wept like a child. And I did this show in Fort Collins the next night, and the house was packed. And for some reason, I just killed it. Like, I just remember that it was a packed house, and and none of my material was sad or anything. I just remember that for those like 10 minutes, maybe it was the juxtaposition of how crappy I was feeling because of the problems with this woman, and then just doing really well at the show, and then afterwards going back home and crying. But I just distinctly remember that. Yeah.
Wow. It's so funny how both you and Shannon have used comedy after a bad breakup, but
it helps. It helps if you do it, or if you do well. If you don't, then it's the opposite. The most memorable set, I guess it's because it was. I was actually just talking to Shane about this before. I can't really say what I was doing with my material, but we've been doing Zoom shows here in Philly, and half of our crew were Black, and they just wanted to talk and promote a lot more things than just comedy. So 1 week we had someone who was an activist, we had someone who was a therapist, just being like, hey, this is how you take care of yourself. Then one day I saw a Neil Lewis post on Facebook about him coming to terms with his intersectionality, reading Trevor Noah's book, and how it helped him. I'm like, he's a great speaker. He's funny. Let's have him on. And right before the show started, they're like, all right, you're gonna introduce him, do your set, then introduce him. I'm like, no.
Do your set in front of a Neil Lewis.
Right. And so they're like, yes. I'm like, no. He doesn't know me like this. They're like, do it. And so right before I'm just texting him, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry. And I just did my what would have been a 10-minute set in 4 minutes and just told him just the most graphic, disgusting things because I just saw my ex-girlfriend who she's a good girl. Like she did amazing things and she's magical. So I talked a lot about magic and he heard a lot of that, and that was that was memorable. Like in terms of good sets, I'm sure it's out there, but that one will always like stay behind me. And after I'm like, I had to text him again. I'm like, I'm so sorry.
Oh my God, that is so awkward.
My God, it was the first time I tried that material too. So every week. With Zoom, you don't want to like do the same material because it's the same people. It's not like you're getting a fresh crowd. So you want to try something new. And it was a brand new set. I was ready. I was all hyped because I just saw her. And then, Neil so sad of me. That was not like, I was like, this is where you separate NFB. And every time they ask, you want to do it? I'm like, no, you guys will never see that again.
I'm gonna listen to the song.
See, Melissa Riccobono's gonna give you a call in a couple weeks.
It was.
I listened to that.
Would you like to come on our podcast?
The funniest part is the twist. Is the twist of me going to be like, yeah, I did too. So everyone, this is a good friend of mine. A gentleman, a scholar,
a man of means and integrity, Mr. Neil Lewis.
Unlike me. No, that's funny.
Mixing stuff like that is so like I've never done a set where I've had to do it where like anything other than just stand up show. The idea of like this, like I'm gonna do stand up and then someone's gonna like say something serious or vice versa. Like I couldn't do that.
It was a meltdown, bro. It was so bad. It was me spending like weeks just hyping him, being like, yeah, we need to get a Neil on. He's this incredibly intelligent, articulate person who's also funny. And then they're like, okay, do your set and introduce him. And I'm like, I don't have a knock who's there set. That's not my style. He's gonna learn something about me that he did not want to know.
Look for Shannon on the virtual NFB convention 2021 agenda, ladies and gentlemen.
No. You guys, yes, NFB will officially be canceled, guys. Give it up for me.
I don't think.
Hey, they get press.
I've been asked a couple of times to perform at like
the talent show,
NFB kind of stuff, and the idea of performing in front of blind people to me is a nightmare. There's no way I would do it.
Why?
Because they will heckle you. Because they'll heckle you. They don't care. I remember those general sessions. They'll yell crap at you, and it's annoying. and you feel pressured to like say like, what are you going to tell them about being blind? I don't know. And it's just kind of. I've been around the NFB since I was a kid, so that would be like to me that would be like, hey, go do stand up in front of everyone you went to high school with. Why would I do that? That sounds horrible. And they'll heckle you. So they will absolutely yell at you.
Yeah, I mean I did it a couple of times, and it was awful because you can't be yourself. You can't, even if someone heckles you, you can't react the way you would do with a regular audience. You can't say, you can't whatever the clap back that you have to hold back. And if you have to hold back anything as an artist, as a comedian, everything from that point on will bomb, and it's not worth it. It's just not, because then it justifiably, if someone sees you, they'll be like, oh, he's not that funny, which, you probably weren't, because you're not going to be on. And if you want people to appreciate what you do, you want to give them the best show. And honestly, unless that's your thing, and unless you're a Gaffigan who can make people laugh in the cleanest of circumstances, you don't want to do it, and you shouldn't do it.
I feel like as I'm an honorary panelist now, I'm just gonna jump into the panel
Hop on
here.
in, bro.
I feel like comedy is like one of those really vulnerable performing arts. Like when I play shows, when I play gigs, it's like the hometown gigs are the most awkward gigs. Like the like anywhere where you know people, like
Mm-hmm.
the banter is automatically like a little bit different. And one of the worst things that I saw from this was I saw a local comedian, and it was a tiny club. It was like 30, 40 people. And his family came to the show, I guess. And he was telling a story about them. And
Oh.
every detail that he, like, it's all about perception. So every detail that might have been slightly off, his grandmother was yelling out from the back of the crowd, "That didn't happen! It happened like this!" And she was just like screaming.
That's hilarious. That's funny. I did it one time. I had my parents, and it's funny. They saw me in Boston, and I can't cuss. They're again both ordained ministers. I can't be myself. Right before I went on stage, my mom pulls me. She's like, "You will not talk about your dad, and you will not use bad words." I'm like, so I went
The
up
show
to
is
like, you know
canceled,
what?
Mom. Thank you for
Right,
coming.
exactly, right? Like, let me just go home.
I went up and I just started doing crowd work. I'm like, "Hey, what's up? All right, what's your name? George, you're my dad." And it just didn't work at all. I'm like, I can't pretend like this random dude's my dad now. And he liked me. Everyone else was like, you're what are you doing? And they were right. I just sweat. And I sweat when I'm nervous, and I sweat when I'm hot. And it just so happened that night it was hot and I was nervous, so my shirt was soaked. It was disgusting. And
I just
I'm
want
not.
you to know that after this episode, you sound really sweaty because you probably said the word sweat like 10 times.
It's hot here. It's hot here right now. And
The humidest
waiting-
of scene changes, ladies and gentlemen.
This is so true.
I forgot to take my hoodie off. I went out to grab my groceries, and it's like 40s right now. So I made myself sweat. So hilarious. Good call. Good ear.
I'm the worst about that. I realized I left my jacket on like 3 hours after I've come inside. Why is it so damn hot in here? Oh, nope. Just my thermal jacket.
It's you.
Yeah.
It's just your jacket because you didn't take your jacket off. So now you're sweating. Oh my
It's
god.
just that COVID 40 I gained, and everything
happened.
makes me sweat.
All right. I love how you use comedy as a way to pick you up from a low point in your life. I think that's something that actually probably strengthened you as an artist. What ways do you feel adversity can strengthen comedians with disabilities?
I think just naturally most comedians in general are probably a lot of people who've used comedy as a defense mechanism. I grew up in a family of 6, so I felt a lot of pain. And so we had to do things to do it. And growing up, especially being blind in the middle of nowhere, Hawaii, where blindness wasn't thought of as a fad, you had to do things to laugh instead of cry, right? People weren't kind, but when you made them laugh, they were a lot nicer. And you could start growing, they'll accept you more if you can make them laugh. But if you show any pain, especially where I grew up, it created a little more barriers. So I would say half of my family are very, very funny because we have no choice but to be growing up where we were. And the other couple are quite introverted.
What island are you from on Hawaii?
Grew up on the island of Hawaii, or the Big Island.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My family was like just there, like maybe 2 months ago. They absolutely loved it. Like my sister wants to move there.
Which part were they?
I don't know. I don't know. I just know it's called the Big Island. Is that the same thing as Kona or something? I don't know what I'm talking
Yeah,
about.
that's where
Yeah,
Kona is.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. They were
yeah.
like right on
No,
the
we're
beach.
oh yeah, we're very proud of the Big Island. Always used to say FBI from Big Island. That's representing. But yeah, we're crazy Big Island, but very low population.
Yeah,
We
but that's what they loved about it though, because they were like there weren't just like tourists just crawling everywhere. Like it was pretty like it was nice. It was like kind of like secluded in a way, you know?
Oh yeah, super, super. As Kona is like the mini Waikiki.
Yeah.
There's a lot of sun, a lot of beaches, but not a lot of people.
That's awesome. So I've read somewhere that the best way to avoid awkwardness in stand-up is to just address any issues right away. So, for example, one of my favorite comedians is Kevin Hart, and he always talks about being short. So, have either of you addressed blindness on stage, and if so, how?
I think it would be weird if you didn't. Like if you got on stage and it's obvious you have a cane or a guide dog and you just didn't mention it, I actually kind of think it would be funny. But the audience would weird them out. Me as a comic, I would be like, that's hilarious. Yeah. But yeah, it would just I mean, I think I don't know. It depends, because I would say, well, don't rely on it as a subject matter. But the first and foremost, have good material, be funny, pay attention to the crowd and their responses, and work with them, and then worry about whether and how much. And that was when I first started. That was something I struggled with: is how much should I talk about my blindness? And then after a while, I was just like, my other friends, when I tell them that, they were like, just be funny. Like if you're gonna have stories about that, you're gonna have stories about other stuff. So I do think it should be addressed, because it's something very obvious, and it's also something that a lot of people don't know about. So you can kind of get material out of it that's, I would say, less common, because everybody can get up there and be like, so black people and white people are different. Dating, relationships are weird. Let's talk about that. But I can talk about things that maybe most comics aren't talking about. So that also kind of gives it a nice little edge, so you don't have to tell just randomly cliched airplane food jokes. Something like that.
No, he come totally spot on. I'd have to agree with him. It was actually really funny. I was that comedian. My first year, I would not talk about my blindness. I went on stage, people sat there, held their breath, and it was actually being, and this is the great thing about comedy. People who are comedians want to laugh too. So it was one of the old timers. He came up to me after. It was out in New York. It was at Broadway Comedy Club. This guy's like, you've got material, you got energy, but why aren't you talking about your blindness, man? What are you doing? And I'm like, I don't want to be, because we growing up being blind, blind. So everything about it is, you fought to avoid making it funny. But as David mentioned, completely correct. It's a different point of view. You go up on stage to give your point of view, to tell your story. So it's kind of a disservice that I was so high strung and being like, no, I'm not going to talk about that. And it was a year until someone pushed me and said, just talk about it. And yeah, there's a couple of jokes that came of it. And you try to do it in a way that's not hack. You don't want to go up there and be like, good looking crowd. That's hack. That's awful. But we all have a story. We have something to talk about. And that's, David's spot on.
So how do you guys feel about blindness jokes then? Is there a line that you will or won't cross? Can other people make blindness jokes? Like if you went up there first, like and another comedian was like, oh, that blind guy, like, how do y'all feel about that as comedians? Or is everything just fair game as long as it's funny?
It depends, I think, on what kind of environment you're in. If it's just an open mic and people are getting up there and maybe some guy gets up or some lady gets up a couple after you and makes some reference to you, then fine, whatever. It's just an open mic. But if it's a show where because the open mic, open mic is pretty much, they're usually longer and anyone can sign up and they run a really long time. But an actual showcase, usually it is an hour and a half or an hour and 45 or 2 hours. And there's a certain set of comedians that are booked in advance. So let's say if it was a showcase and that happened, I wouldn't get mad, but I would be a little annoyed because I'd be like, why are you riffing on the comic who came two before you? Do your own material. I wouldn't be like mad. But as far as it doesn't, I mean, if someone makes a joke about blindness in general, if it's funny and it works, then that's awesome. Cool. And that's happened to me before where people have had a joke that involved like a blind person or something and they came up after me like, is that okay? And I'm like, well, just it made the audience laugh. That's cool. I mean, because it's not like they're not directing it specifically at me. And so I don't know. But usually jokes that have to do with being blind, like if outside of stand-up, like if someone just in real life tells me a joke that has to do with blindness, usually they'll preface it by saying, or they'll tell me a really terrible joke. And not terrible, like offensive, just a crappy one. And then afterwards, they'll usually say, like, was that offensive? No. Was it funny? No, not really. So that does happen a lot. It's like, was that offensive or funny? I think one time a woman did ask me, was that offensive or funny? I was like, no. Which one? That's very bad.
They hit me right in the feelings. It's true. I'm like, I get. That's right. Yeah. So I've hosted a bunch, and as he mentioned, it happens a lot during open mics, especially. And there'll be times where I can't hide my disgust, and I'll be like, ugh, that's my son. Ugh. And they're like, he offended. I'm like, no, you just not a good joke. You're just embarrassing comedy. Like, no, there's been a couple of times. Shout out to David Rosenberg. I roasted him before he got on stage. I'm like, yeah, man, this guy loves guinea pig. He's a single 40-year-old Jewish guy who's broke. Let's all give him prayers. And he gave him on stage. He's like, I appreciate that, Shannon, because everybody knows that handicap prayers are worth double. And I'm like, oh, that's hilarious. That was so quick, funny, mean, evil, and it was different. It was a good response to what I did. It was good riff.
It was also right after you got off stage. It wasn't like a few people after you.
Yes, it wasn't like six. I remember that blind guy 16 people ago.
Yeah.
Check this out. Yeah, he's right. And it's always that too. When someone approaches me about a joke, I've never had it's never been funny. It's never been funny when they're like, what do you think of this? Like, if it was funny, you would do it. The crowd would love it. That's who you're trying to impress. I'm not offended. I just hate bad comedy. So be funny.
It sounds like you have both had interesting experiences, none of which have been embarrassing, it sounds like. But Ali Wong is another one of another comedian who I like a lot, and she is really crazy. But in her book, she talks about a time when someone was introducing her, and it was during a show, and she's an Asian American, by the way. And when they introduced her, they basically didn't make any reference to her as a comedian. They basically objectified her as a female and as an Asian, naming like all these just stereotypical jobs and things like that she like, oh, this girl, like, and then all these just stereotypes. And so she actually bombed that show, and she says that the reason is because of that introduction. It just really threw her off. So my question is, in a way, my question is, what's your response to that? But also, it's more about, have you ever been introduced this way? How would you handle that? And how do you recommend that other people handle it if something uncomfortable in a show happens? Is there kind of a joke that you would have, as like a response to that? If someone's naming all these, you see this guy, he's bumping into everything all over the streets, tripping down, something like that. If someone was just sort of stereotyping you, how would you handle that on set? And are you thinking about those things? Are you ever prepared for those times, or do you just like not even worry about it?
So personally, this has happened. I don't think about it because it doesn't happen often enough, and you're just preparing for your set. That's what your mindset is. I've had it happen. I'm just gonna keep dropping names because I want to burn as many bridges as I can. Immediately give it. There's a dude in Hawaii named Paco. I love Paco. He's the most energetic, actually Philly guy. But every time I hate when he hosts. In my opinion, just good comedian, worst host. Every time before I go on, he's like, "All right, everybody, we're gonna give it up for this guy. I'm gonna tell you this now. He's like a superhero. He's like Daredevil because he's blind. He's blind, and he'll go 7 minutes. And before you go on stage, I'm hyped, ready, and sweating. And then he just makes me, and I'll go up on stage, and now you got to talk about what he talked about. So it kind of pulls your momentum away. And I got the crowd back, but it's hard. It's really hard when they do that. It's hard to prepare for it because it depends who's on stage, what they say too. You can't, every blind joke's different, or the way they address you as a blind person will be different too. So it happens only with him, actually.
Next time he does that, you should just get on stage and immediately say, "I think I'm more like Catwoman," but then don't elaborate on it. Just go directly into your set.
Let's go. I usually roast him because he says he's like, "Yeah, man, people say I look like Aquaman." Oh, he's like 5'7", and I guess he has the hair. So I'm like, yeah, he looks more like Waterboy than Aquaman. But that's even then, it's just it's a tough joke. But like, I'm always sweating because I'm like, dude, get off stage, bro. Get off stage.
Wow. But you know what? You guys also came up with good ways of handling it. And it's good to know that it doesn't happen that often for aspiring blind comedians. It's like, it's not as much of a worry as they might think it is. You know what I mean? Or maybe they've seen different things, in various shows. It's good that they don't have to worry about it as much. And that it's true. Like there's a lot of different ways of handling it. You can ignore it. You can respond to it. You can, make a joke, right? Crack a joke right back at them. So I like that. I like the different ideas that the two of you have for dealing with it. So what about finding open mics? Like arriving there, I don't even, okay, honestly, I don't go to open mics. So I don't even know, like, how do you sign up for them? Do you sign up for them like on the spot? Like, what do you do? How does this work? And how does it work as a blind guy or gal? But we don't have any here.
It all depends on the city. New York City, most of the mics you have to sign up ahead of time, pay online, and that sometimes it's accessible, sometimes they ask you to text somebody. There's a master list of all the mics that some amazing person has created, so you can go through every state individually and look what mics are on what days. In Philly itself, they've got a calendar. That was one of the amazing things that was very helpful, but it was weird because a lot of it is outdated. So when I first moved to Philly, it was a tough go because you don't want to be like, "Hey guys, I'm blind," because they think you're joking. It's always a bit. They always think there's a bit happening. So yeah. I made that post online, and they're like, "Look at the calendar." I'm like, "It's not accessible and it's not dated." Like I went to this one bar, and they're like, "Oh, we haven't had comedy in 2 months." Then I went to another bar, and they're like, "Oh, it's the other bar." And so finally I made that post, and they're like, "That's not even funny, man. Blind? Come on." And finally I had to do like this sad little, "Hey guys, I'm being real. I'm actually blind. Moved here from Hawaii. I work late. I work early in the morning. I just need to know the times and days of these mics, especially the ones on the weekends." And they're comedians, surprisingly very nice when they don't think you're throwing a bit.
That's happened to me too, and it's a really weird. When it's like you post like, "I'm blind and my screen reading software on my phone isn't reading this calendar correctly." Like, "Oh, you're just kidding." Like, how would that be a funny joke? It wouldn't be offensive or funny. That would just be a dumb thing to randomly I'm going to randomly message these people and say, "Not only am I blind, but the website isn't accessible." screen reading software. That's not even a joke. That's just a dumb lie.
But then you start reading the posts on there, and you're like, "That's awful." That's plausible.
Yeah. But like he was pretty much said all that stuff. As far as going to him, you know, when I love Houston, but it's much more spread out than Denver was, and so you know, as far as transportation, I'll either have to get a ride with a friend or take a Uber or Lyft or whatnot. When I lived in Denver, there were light rail trains and buses and and I lived in the middle of downtown, so a lot of mics I went to were, you know, I could walk to. So it's just, you know, you just find out where they are and you go there and you find out who the host is. And if you don't know anybody, generally you can go up to the bartender and say like, hey, you know, where is the comedy and who do I speak to, and go talk to them and ask about the list. Put your name up on the list. And
very interesting. Cool. Now, what about navigating the stage? What tips do y'all have for finding the mic, or do you ever like look at the stage setup beforehand, or do you just kind of wing it? You just walk up there. How's that go?
I check if I'm smart and think ahead, I'll check. Sometimes when I'm getting on stage, I don't know why I do this, but once I'm getting on stage, I'll extend my cane out really far, almost like I'm like an extended arm, and I'll tap the mic stand. I don't know why I always do it, but it's almost like if I had a hook cane, one of those hook canes, like a candy cane, I'd just reach out and hook it and then walk towards it. And I know that's not how you use a cane. So for some reason when I get on, especially if it's a stage where it's a far walk to the mic, again, maybe it's an attention getter or something. I don't know. But for the most part, I know where, you know, the mic is, and, you know, sometimes I'll, you know, walk up normal with my cane and find it, but usually I try and find it before. I've only fell off the stage once, and I was so annoyed because it wasn't because I knew the audience was going to think it was a bit, and it wasn't, and I knew that if I said it wasn't a bit, it was still going to think it was. So, and it was a crappy open mic. So the fact that people thought it was a bit and it got a really good laugh was kind of nice, because it was an open mic it was at a crappy bar that usually people didn't pay attention. So, you know, it was annoying, but it got a laugh.
How about you, Shannon? Have you ever fallen off the stage?
No, I haven't. And people have actually suggested that as a bit. Have you? Nah, I don't. I've never fallen off the stage. Going up to the stage, I guess we'll also talk about this too with lighting. I talk to the host and I request. I'm like, can you guys just hand me the mic, and then, you know, I'll just start my set, and I'll move right, boom, find the stand, move the stand on the side, and then just go from there. But I'll listen to where everyone else is entering or walking onto stage and do that. I should probably check it beforehand, but by the time I'm there, I'm already pumped, ready to do a show. So I'll go and get an adult beverage, because I like to patronize the establishment, because love your bartender. That's so I do that.
So what were you gonna say about the lighting? Because I didn't have a question about that, but I'm curious.
About the light. Usually I'll talk to the host and they'll ask me, the lighting. So the lighting, meaning when they tell you when you have a minute or 2 minutes left in your set. Yeah. Sorry, not the visual lighting, to give you a heads up on when you're ready to go off. So they'll be like, what do you want? And it's probably a weird bit that I love, is to figure out how they'll figure things out. So they've tried different things. People will knock on the table. Some people will be like, light 1 minute. Some people will click their tongue. So I've seen a bunch of different ones, but it's always fun and have them figure that out.
And you can run the light for a while until people get to know you and then stop taking shit from you. And then you have to actually. But at first you'll be like, I didn't know you lit me. I didn't know. Then after a while, people are like, you know what time is and you know how it works. Usually I will. That usually it'll be like someone taps on the table, or I mean, the longer you do it, the more you know how long. You get a sense of time, and you know how long your bits are. There was one show that I would do occasionally, and this host, he would always It was from the video game Mortal Kombat from back in the 90s. After when it would have 1 minute left, he would yell, "Finish him!" But nobody would know. Nobody knew. I don't think anyone in the bar knew. They just randomly, the host would yell that, man, not why. And then a minute later, I got off stage, so I guess the audience assumed that's what happened. But yeah, after a while, you kind of get a sense of time. But yeah, when you first start, either the host will ask you, like, how do we deal with this? Or you should go ask them, because it is a considerate thing to do, and you don't want to run the light, especially if it's an open mic with 30 people have signed up. You don't want to be a jerk and go longer than you want to, because that's making the host stay longer than they need to, and that's making the other comedians stay longer than they want to. And so, I don't know. I mean, like you said, with knocking on the table, or, I've had hosts just come right up to me and tap me on the shoulder while on stage, and I was like, oh, all right.
That's an interesting way to do it.
You really want to be the one to initiate it, especially open mics. More than likely, the people who are hosting open mics are probably new features or on the borderline, so you're giving them extra work to think, and you don't want to do that. You want the best show every time.
Or maybe they might not know how to ask you. So
that's true
take
too.
the initiative, because they may not know how to ask anyway.
True.
That's true. Yeah, because like they may feel like kind of like awkward about certain things. So it's always nice to minimize that if you bring it up first, which is kind of what we were talking about earlier with, like, making jokes about blindness yourself and stuff like that. So yeah, no, that's all really good advice. So I have to ask this question. I'm sorry, it's kind of cliche and like humdrum, and everybody's tired of talking about COVID, right? But how are you all doing your comedy in times of COVID? Are you guys doing, are you guys like live on social media? I know Shannon just hosted like a talent show, but he didn't take part in that. It was like a virtual talent show. So like what are you guys doing to stay relevant, even though you can't physically be in the comedy clubs right now?
I draw a lot, and I've been selling a lot of my artwork on Instagram, Facebook, and stuff like that. And so that's what I've been doing mostly. Some of it's funny drawings, but just because I can't go to open mics, unfortunately, this year I really haven't gotten out there since March, which is, in the 7 years, has been the longest I've gone without. And I need to at least go to. There are some open mics that are starting to come back up, and with social distancing and whatnot, I think I might try and hit a few at least, but just be safe about it, whatnot. But it has been difficult getting out there, definitely.
Are you writing new material?
Am I writing? No, I've not written new one.
You should write like a whole
about COVID and the elections. I can't think of anything else.
Oh gosh.
This year I did nothing. What did you do? Nothing. I wish I could say I have written new material. I should now. Thanks for asking me. I'm like, I should do that.
How about you, Shannon? How have you been staying relevant and working on whatever you're working on? I was gonna say working on your material, but you also may not have. I don't know.
So I was talking to Shane. We were out here in Philly. There's a pub called Fergie's, and we were doing a Zoom mic for like 26 weeks, which Zoom sucks. I hate doing comedy on Zoom. So like while that was happening, around the world ended is when we started, but they started opening outdoor shows. So I've been doing outdoor shows out in Virginia, out here in Philly. So that's been awesome. And
there's been a few of those in Houston, and I need to contact, because sometimes in certain places it's good to wait to be asked to be on shows, and sometimes you got to take an initiative. And I think in this case, definitely I need to take some initiative, because if you stay away long enough, people forget who you are. And you just reminded me outside shows. I need to message some people about that, because they have had some. So
yeah, for sure.
Have you all noticed any differences? Because you both of you have performed on such different stages. From Hawaii to Philly to Virginia to New York to Denver to Texas to this place. Like you guys are all over. Have you all noticed in your experiences differences in maybe your reception, from the audience, or just like general differences in the comedy clubs in these different cities? What do y'all, what are your opinions?
Going from Hawaii, so it's hilarious just going from one even going from Boston to New York, you adjust things a little bit differently. You might say words. You might feel out who's there. I always like to listen to the crowd. So you don't want to stereotype. You don't, but you can feel the vibe. You can hear if someone's a little more woke or someone's a little more conservative. You're like, oh yeah, they were in the military, so they'll like things more. So in Hawaii, there's a lot of military, but there's also like a lot of old school Hawaii people. So they don't mind racial jokes, but they don't like cussing. And and so the East Coast is they don't mind cussing, but sometimes the racial jokes, depending on who it's coming from, might make them feel a little uncomfortable. So just knowing your region, and sometimes it may take a couple of bombs to know it, but there's definitely a difference for sure.
I know that when I was in Houston, I've had to get better at crowd work now that I've lived in Houston, because a lot of the audiences, they'll not necessarily heckle you, but they're just more likely to talk back to you than they were in Denver. And of those audiences, in both places were great. I know that demographic-wise, Colorado was definitely literally white, and there's all colors of the rainbow in Houston. So, it was. There are certain like I'm not trying to stereotype again, but there are some types of jokes, I guess, that if you're playing for nothing but all white hipsters, you can make some music snob jokes and reference, like, hipster groups like Wilco or something like that. Whereas if you're to a general public of all different kind of demographics, they may not get your niche reference. So I think that's one thing that was different in Denver, and especially in Boulder. It isn't a bad thing, but I just kind of had to learn that, sometimes your quirky niche references may not work for just a general everyday people of all shapes and sizes, rather than nothing but, bearded 25-year-old hipsters.
We talked about, no, that makes perfect sense.
Terrible.
No, that makes perfect sense. And it's not, it was put in a correct way. Well, I don't know. I'm not a hipster, so I
say it. Whoa.
You're speaking on behalf of hipsters. You are canceled.
I am not a hipster, so I cannot. But what was I gonna say? Do either of you, because especially like Shannon, like you're from Hawaii, and I don't know how many Hawaiians there are in Philly, but like, do either of you speak about your other demographics other than blindness in your material?
I'm a 35-year-old white guy who lives alone, so that's pretty much the description of a serial killer. So I try not to focus on that.
Play up on that.
That is terrible. Like I can't be on Tinder because it just says 35-year-old white male who lives alone. It's terrifying.
You're like Super Nintendo.
Life goals, man.
Super Nintendo, and it's very close to his mother. Just Jesus. I do talk about. I went to a seminary for grad school, so sometimes I'll talk about my experiences with religion, or some experiences growing up in Louisiana, and just random observations that I make. So, yeah, I definitely, the blindness thing is definitely the only thing I talk about. And even when I'm talking about the blindness thing, like I've had jokes that reference stuff that happens in the National Federation of the Blind, and after a while, I had to cut them a little bit, because you have to explain what the National Federation of the Blind is to an audience, and if there's too much exposition before the punchline, it gets really boring. So,
yeah, that sounds like another niche joke kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
I definitely talk about my other things. I just did a show during Halloween, and growing up, both of my parents were ordained ministers, so we weren't allowed to have Halloween. We weren't allowed to have that. So the show's theme was, what you used to be afraid of before COVID. And I'm like, it was just God. Yeah, this Halloween show is against God. No, like, this is my fear. If my mom ever saw me dressed up for Halloween, I'd be like, no, the military boots. I'm just Antifa, Mom. That is exactly the one reaction. I'd rather them think I'm a evil left or right wing rebel than ever think that I'm just going against God. But that, yeah, and I'm Filipino, Hawaiian, so talk about that. There's, yeah, actually for the biggest part of my comedy career, most of it was talking about my family, about my grandma and her very stereotypical, super like aggressive Hawaiian, cussing at everyone, yelling at everyone, the words she would use. Like when I got a recipe from her one time, I'm like, all right, give me this. She's like, all right, get one handful of this. Get a scoop of that. I'm like, what, a scoop of, like, how much is a scoop? She's like, a scoop? You don't know what math is? And then she's like, no, now go get the soy sauce and add 3 glurks. It's like, what's a glurk? She's like, you tip the bottle over and you hear glurk, glurk, glurk. And that's the type of things, you know, for a while, it was just like, this is what you knew. So you start with what you're most comfortable with, the things that was naturally funny to you, and then you expand from there.
That's actually hilarious. You guys, I'm sure have some really great material. Both of you. Are you on social media where our listeners can listen to you, and maybe we can even link it in our YouTube for this episode?
Well, I have 2 YouTube channels, and one of them I don't ever use anymore, and I want to delete, but I can't remember the email and password it was under. And that has like 40 videos, and none of them are my stand-up. Some of it's like music parodies that I wrote when I was 16. Some of them are like random sketches or me doing character impressions and stuff. And both are named David Glasspool. And then there's another channel called David Glasspool that only has like 5 videos on it, and those are 5 videos of me doing stand-up at a place called Comedy Works in Denver, and they're 4 years old. So if someone looks them up and likes them, I can say, I think I'm funnier than I was then, because it was 4 years ago. So nothing really recent. I think I did have a set recorded about a year ago that I could post, but I just haven't yet. So that's, as far as I know, that's all I got.
Awesome. So they can find you under David Glasspool on YouTube.
Yeah, David Glasspool.
Anyway, his voices are
just
like
sounds the greatest last name. Sounds like the most rugged part of England. You don't want.
Very good. Come to the Glasspool Manor.
Shannon, how about for you? How can they find you?
I haven't done anything because it was supposed to be more of a calendar and promotional thing. I guess you can find my website. It's shannonisaboy.com. And I think my Instagram and whatnot is on there. My Facebook is just my regular Facebook, but I think my YouTube, my Instagram, my Twitter is all on my on shannonisaboy.com.
Awesome. Spelled just like it sounds. I would assume.
Yes.
And as far as Instagram, my Instagram is Glasspool _D, but all of my Instagram is just the artwork that I do. So that there's no stand up on that, but my artwork, which some of that I guess is funny. So that counts, I guess.
Awesome.
And Facebook thing, just regular name.
Awesome. You guys did a great job, and thank you so much for this informative and entertaining episode. Especially, during these times with everything going on with COVID-19. So hopefully people got some ideas maybe for new material, or they got some encouragement to go out and try it. There's virtual open mics. There are very doable open mics that will one day be in person again with everything kind of shutting down again. Go for it. It sounds like we have 2 people here who really enjoy doing it and who really love it. So thank you everyone for listening. And this has been another episode of Scene Change.
I'm Caitlin McIntyre, President of the National Federation of the Blind Performing Arts Division. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Scene Change. If you like what you heard, be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and visit our website at nfb-pad.org. There you'll find links to our social media, membership, and resources for blind performers. Thanks to everyone who makes this show happen. Scene Change is produced by Shane Lowe, Chris Nussbaum, Seun Choi, and Precious Perez, with music by Ryan Strunk and Tom Page. Remember, you can be the performer you want. Blindness is not what holds you back. We'll see you next time.